turning cooler across the board.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
On a packed show tonight, we will have a look at what is going on in the English Channel, exclusive footage from an Albanian gang. We'll talk about net zero, why Conservative voters are turning their back on the idea. We'll ask what it all means for the leadership campaign with a Truss supporter. Some extraordinary polling showing us how British media has become more woke, more liberal and more left-wing over the last 10 years. And joining me on Talking Pints, the man who was the voice of Margaret Thatcher on Spitting Image for many, many years. Before all of that, let's get the news from Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. The top story tonight on GB News. Archie Battersby's parents say they're extremely disappointed after losing their Supreme Court appeal to save their son's life. It means Archie, who's 12 years old and been in a coma since April, has been declared brain stem dead by doctors and will be taken off life support. 3 judges refused to postpone the withdrawal of his treatment and also refused permission to appeal against their ruling. Archie's mother, Holly Dance, said she'd keep fighting until the bitter end.
Archie's my child. It shouldn't be down to other people to decide where he takes his last breath and if he lives or dies. It's wrong. He's on 3 medications. He's absorbing feed. He's gained weight. That's on record. He's gained weight. You know, it's definitely not what they're putting over to the court, but the court aren't prepared to listen or allow us to have independent specialists in. There's not really much more I can do.
Archie Battersby's mum. Now, a man who was arrested carrying a crossbow in the grounds of Windsor Castle has been charged under the Treason Act. Police say Jaswant Singh Chail from Southampton is accused of intending to injure or alarm the Queen. The 20-year-old was intercepted on Christmas Day last year. He'll appear in court later this month. Politics and Tory leadership candidate Liz Truss has abandoned a proposed policy to slash public sector pay for workers outside London. At the hustings event in Exeter last evening, where she appeared alongside her opponent Rishi Sunak, she claimed the plan could save nearly £9 billion. But Labour and senior Conservatives said the policy would level down the country. BP has reported a profit of nearly £7 billion for a second quarter, the biggest in 14 years. And that's at the same time as UK households are hit by rising oil and gas prices, with inflation at its highest in 40 years. A consultancy firm has warned energy bills could reach more than £3,600 per household this winter. That's hundreds of pounds more than was previously thought for England, Wales and Scotland. British Airways has suspended the sale of short-haul flights from Heathrow for at least a week. The move affects domestic and European services, with the airline saying it's in response to Heathrow's request to limit new bookings. Last month, the airport announced a daily limit of 100,000 passengers until mid-September. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Farage.
Good evening. Well, we weren't wrong yesterday. We said between 6 and 700 would cross the English Channel. The official number was 696, with another boat picked up with a further 50 on at 1 o'clock this morning. And I promised you last night we would show you some exclusive and quite shocking footage. And I have to thank a GB News viewer who's done a deep dive into TikTok and found this material. This video from July was on TikTok, and here it is. They're coming across from Albania. They're going to Brussels by aeroplane. There they are. They've arrived in Brussels. They're now on the coast, as you can see. They're at Dunkirk, and this is where they've got to get to. They have got to get to London, and the advert says it can all be done in 24 hours. A video here of the boat to tell the punters who are going to get rid of 4,500, 5,000 what it is. And there we are, 27th of July. Come on the 27th of July. It's £4,500 per person. There's the phone number. We've obviously redacted the last part of the phone number, but there is the phone number to ring. And this is your journey. Look, beautiful flat seas. There's the boat just taking off from the beach of Dunkirk. Not a gendarme in sight. Quite why Priti Patel wants to send tens of millions of more pounds to them is quite utterly beyond me. And they're off on their cross-channel journey. But of course, it turns out that it's not 21 miles or so across the English Channel. No, all they've got to do is get to the UK 12-mile line. That's the important thing. Once you get to the UK 12-mile line, something is going to happen. And we'll see this in a little bit as this film progresses. Yes, here we are, a sunny day. They're at sea. There we are, they're at sea. Everybody's happy, nice and calm. And there's the taxi. The taxi's arrived, yes, otherwise known as Border Force. It could, of course, on some days have been the RNLI, but they crossed the 12-mile line. They've probably, in many cases, been escorted there all the way by the French Navy, and they're picked up. And here we are, they've arrived. It's London. It's Saturday night in London. We're staying in a lovely 4-star hotel. Let's all go out and celebrate. That was last week. This week, today, this was posted on TikTok. Have a look at this. There we are. Summer sale! You can now come for a knockdown price of £3,500. Well, there it is, folks. How on earth is this allowed on a major international social media platform like TikTok? What the hell are the National Crime Agency, the Home Office, other police forces doing? Or is it that TikTok is simply unenforceable? We did put those questions directly to them. The Home Office said posts used by smugglers to promote lethal crossings are totally unacceptable and require social media companies to engage in dialogue to prevent their platforms from being exploited. And TikTok say this content has no place on TikTok. We do not allow content that depicts or promotes people smuggling as stated in our community guidelines and have permanently banned these accounts. We work closely with UK law enforcement. Well, I suppose I'm tempted to think perhaps not closely enough. Well, in the light of all of this, in the light of the numbers now rapidly going back up again, my audience question for you today is, what will Truss or Sunak do about this? Let me know your thoughts. your views. Farage@gbnews.uk. I'll tell you what I think. Nothing. No, absolutely nothing. Because what are their stated positions? Last night, in the hustings debate that took place down in Exeter, from Liz Truss, she supports the Rwanda policy, and she wants to make sure the ECHR will not be able to overrule domestic attempts to curb illegal immigration. What she means is she's supporting Dominic Raab's Bill of Rights, which we know has no legal supremacy over ECHR. Rishi Sunak has promised radical measures. And privately, his people brief that he's prepared to have a think about ECHR. I think they will do precious little. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Joining me, Out Mehmet, chairman of Migration Watch. Out, they were extraordinary scenes in those videos, weren't they?
They were unbelievable, frankly. But the fact is that they're getting away with it. That's why they're doing it. If they couldn't get away with it, if they couldn't get people here, then frankly, it wouldn't happen. And not only is it happening, but once they get here, if they're not being moved on anywhere else, if they're not being sent back, then what on earth is going to persuade the smugglers in particular that they're not going to be able to make money out of this? And what sort of persecution are they exactly running away from in Albania? I mean, we keep hearing that this is all about the human rights of the individuals and they've fled this and they've fled that. They haven't, for goodness sake. Not only have they fled from somewhere where there is no persecution in the way that we recognise it with regard to refugees, but they go through safe countries to get to the shore to come over this country. And our potential Prime Minister, whichever one of them it's going to be, is saying absolutely nothing about it, beyond spouting the usual claptrap about we must pull out of the ECHR, which they're not saying. But they're not saying that. They're not saying
They're
qualifying it. You're right.
I mean,
you're right.
You know, I think actually, to be fair, Suella Braverman very clearly at the start of this contest was saying that. I think the rest of them, including Kemi Badenoch was strongish on it, but they're not so strong. And these are sort of hinting privately, we might have to look at this in the future. But there's no indication they're going to do that. There's no indication that they're going to take on much of what we're signed up to at the United Nations, which, while it may not have force of law, is used by judges
absolutely.
In judgments.
Absolutely.
I don't see this changing at all.
No, look, two things, Nigel. First of all, I've heard from the Home Office today that maybe Rwanda is actually having an effect, that there are fewer people coming over than we expected. Absolute tosh. We're still going to get, even at the present rate, something like 50 to 55,000. Is that really a small number, something to celebrate?
Quite.
Even if we get to the stage, which will be several years down the road, frankly, of withdrawing from the ECHR, it won't make the blindest bit of difference so long as once people get here or get to our 12-mile limit, at that point, they're taken in and they go nowhere other than to central London to celebrate their arrival. Once, really, we start showing business that we mean what we say, that you're not going to be allowed to stay, at that point, there may be some impact. Otherwise, all of it is just talk.
What are our politicians scared of?
I think what they're scared of is failure. I mean, they're failing anyway. But what they don't want to do is make promises, make commitments that ultimately they'll be judged on. But that's politics. That's what politics is all about. If you want to be re-elected, frankly, you make a promise, you keep it, it works, and then you say to the people, look what I've done, vote for me again. At the moment, really, there's nothing, absolutely nothing that any of them, frankly, on either side, can point to and say, look what we've done.
No. And the sheer brazenness of what's appearing there on TikTok. You know, phone numbers, UK mobile phone numbers, summer sales. It's unbelievable.
It's Mickey taking in the extreme, frankly. We've got people who are effectively sticking two fingers up. It's not
absolutely
V for victory, it's V you know what.
I do. Out Mehmet, thank you for joining us. Now, another issue that I think is vitally important and thus far doesn't get talked about very much in the Conservative leadership debate is the whole question of net zero, which, of course, Boris Johnson went for in a very, very big way indeed. Now, overnight, there's been some very, very interesting polling on this. And it would seem that many Conservative voters in the country are not quite as in love with the idea of a net zero target as those that run most UK media and many of those in the Palace of Westminster in both Houses of Parliament. Behind me, no, people are reticent about net zero. I think they're reticent because they realise we produce less than 1% of global GDP, at least that's man-made CO2. Naturally occurring CO2 is far bigger than anything that we can put out. But they also feel it's going to cost them too much blooming money. And a piece of polling appeared in the Telegraph this morning, and it came from the campaign group Car26. The director, of course, is climate sceptic Lois Perry. Lois, what did this poll tell us?
It basically showed us that 70% of Conservative voters at the last election would actually like a pause and review on all net zero policies. That's those who expressed an opinion. And actually, 52% of those who expressed an opinion overall, and that will include obviously Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, the whole shebang, basically. Yeah, so people don't want it.
So it's 52-48 across the whole of the country.
Yeah,
Very
that's your
familiar
result.
numbers.
That's your result. I
Very
called
familiar
that,
numbers.
actually. 4 points. I should have put a bet on.
But the point is that if you look at, listen and read most mainstream UK media, you would think there was a unanimous view that net zero was the right target, and it's not too dissimilar in both the houses over in the Palace of Westminster.
It's very strange, isn't it?
So
why?
How are people forming these opinions? What do you think? I speculated a moment ago.
Yeah.
What is it you think that is making people say, whoa, hang on a second?
Well, we've just found out that during a period where basically there's effectively no government, or there's no prime minister in place, that the civil service have awarded in the last couple of days a £70 billion procurement contract for net zero projects across the country, or net hospitals, schools. This is about money. If we pause net zero, there's 70 billion quid of our money there that's going to be spent, that the civil service have put out there. I don't remember voting for that. Do you remember voting for that?
No. Well, of course, it was the takeover of the Conservative Party by what I call the Richmond Greens, and that means Carrie and the Goldsmiths. And I was very, very pleased to see Ben Goldsmith attacking you today.
Yes, so am I.
And you're a lunatic.
I am a lunatic, but then that makes sense.
Because you question.
Oh, no, you questioning the orthodoxy. Well, of course, you know all about that.
No debate allowed.
No debate.
But my worry, Lois, and you're a full-time campaigner on this issue, producing very interesting polling like this. But here we have a leadership election for the next Prime Minister. We know where Boris Johnson took us on this. But I'm looking at it. Liz Truss, well, she's committed to net zero by 2050, but she does try to tempt that element that are questioning the cost of net zero by talking about green taxes, or should I be social, renewable and green taxes on electricity, 25%. She said there'll be a moratorium. What she means is she'll suspend it temporarily and then bring it back again. And Rishi Sunak,
well, he loves it.
Well, he basically says that we shouldn't have too many solar panels, we should grow lots of food, and he'll cut VAT on energy bills this autumn. But isn't
That's
the point,
very good of him, isn't it?
But isn't the point that both of these candidates are committed to the net zero target?
They are committed to the net zero target because they've probably been told up until our polling today that it was quite a popular thing to do by their SPADs and by all their advisors and everything.
I see.
But I'm hoping that our polling will make them realise. I mean, the Telegraph's own polling that ran in the story alongside my polling showed that only 4% of Conservative voters see it as a #1 priority. So maybe it's time for a rethink. But I think of the two candidates, Liz Truss is definitely the one who's more on side for the consumer and for ordinary people. She's talking about scrapping the green levy, making sure that any...
No. It's a moratorium. It's a temporary pause.
OK, but that... Oh, fair enough, but that's more than Rishi's saying. I mean, he's saying that his policy is dictated by his 9-year-old daughter, so God help us all in that case.
Well, most fascinating part of that conversation, Lewis, and thank you, is the most fascinating part of that, and it's so true, is that most of our leaders don't have any opinions. They're told by Spads and others what they should think and what will be popular, what will be unpopular. It is truly, the more you get to know these people, the more depressing in many ways it is. In a moment, I'll be joined by Peter Bone MP, and he will argue the case for Liz Truss. And I'll also be joined by Professor Matt Goodwin with some astonishing polling showing you how the British media has changed in the last 10 years and wants you to believe a lot of very bad things about our country.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show, as Liz Truss promises no more lockdowns if she comes into power, we'll be asking Toby Young of The Daily Sceptic if he believes she's ready to turn her back on the pandemic as Prime Minister. Monkeypox mania marches on, but Natalie Winters won't be leaving any stones unturned following a WHO meeting about the vaccine. Plus, Eva Vladingerbroek is back to shine a light on digital IDs after the government in Greece starts rolling them out to its population. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show tonight at 8 o'clock.
So your thoughts? I showed you that amazing footage on TikTok of the Albanian gangs advertising, and the prices now come down. It's a summer sale. And I asked you, which of the two candidates do you think would take on and deal with this crisis? James points the finger at Priti Patel. Says Priti Patel is a traitor. Well, that's too strong a word. And has no intention of stopping the illegals. She needs to resign and take border force with her. Well, I can't see Priti Patel staying in that job. And I have to say, if these are the last few weeks of Priti Patel, why on earth she's suggesting sending tens of millions more pounds to the French when it seems the more money we send them, the more migrants they send us? I just simply don't know. Francesca says, no, not got the guts, doesn't trust either of them. Keith says, we need a new Home Secretary first. Interesting. Priti Patel's coming back quite a lot in these answers. Gary says, first thing the new PM must do is sack the Home Secretary. Well, there you are. A lot of you feeling this is down to the Home Secretary. Now, last night we were joined by a Rishi Sunak supporter. Tonight we're joined by a Liz Truss supporter. It is, of course, Peter Bone, Tory MP for Wellingborough. Peter, we'll come on to tax and the really big debate. And it does seem to me that tax policy, the economy, is at the centre of all of this. And hey, these are important. But the two topics you've watched me covering in the last 25 minutes or so. Let's start off with net zero, this commitment to a net zero target by 2050. Already 25% subsidies of various forms added onto people's electricity bills. Terrifying thoughts of what people are going to have to do, getting rid of their boilers, getting electric cars. I mean, neither candidate is going to change policy, are they?
Well, I'm not sure that's true, because Liz Truss is going to get rid of those energy subsidies. So we're going to read, what's £153 a year saving?
No, but just to be fair...
She's getting rid of those.
No.
For this year.
Ah, right, for this year.
And then we'll see what she's going to do
this
year.
I see. So it's a temporary moratorium.
No, well, I mean, I think what people want to see in this country is the cost of living dealt with. Yeah, of course people would like to see net zero, but not at the ruination of families. And we've got to think about energy security. So, you know, it's quite sensible, as the government is doing, is opening up more oil and gas fields.
So Liz Truss sticks to the net zero target, though?
Well, look, a target in 50 years is pretty meaningless to you and I sitting here. Look, if we can get to electric cars, great, they're better. I don't want to drive around London with diesel. If we can do those, we can do those. But what we can't do is land the cost. If it's going to cost so much to each family, we can't.
Well, I get that. I agree with you.
And that's what Liz has started with.
Right, okay.
So, I mean, she said this. This was right at the heart of her
short-term bribes.
And then Rishi flip-flopped.
A short-term bribe is what we get from Liz Truss.
Well, I don't think that.
And we might get 5% off fuel bills from Rishi. Let's move on to the other issue that we talked about earlier. The small boats, 696, the official figure for yesterday. You know, as someone that travels around the country, this, particularly amongst Conservative voters, is causing absolute rage and anger. We're being humiliated. It's not the Brexit you and I campaign for. So why is Liz better than Rishi on this?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely... This issue is something that really affects people now, and they're really concerned about it. And what you've exposed today is extraordinary. But you've been doing this for ages, and where mainstream media hasn't been following up on this. But that's what my constituents are concerned about. And Liz has said that she will expand the Rwanda policy, and she will tackle these evil smuggling gangs. Now, you know, for years I've chaired the all-party group against human trafficking. These are evil. Can't say on telly, but evil. So evil.
So if we expand the Rwanda policy, let's say we send 10 times the number to Rwanda. 10 times naught is still naught.
Yeah, 10 times naught is no good. Well, but we have to get over the European Court's ruling.
So
And
fine.
I'm
all ears, Peter. But
she said she was going to do that. She said she's going to overcome that problem.
No, what she has done is she's reparroted Dominic Raab's Bill of Rights, which he's put before the Commons, which he admits, at the end of the day, will not have supremacy over the European Court of Human Rights.
He says it will work. I challenged in the Commons. I said, right, I'm happy to give you the chance. If it works, absolutely fine. But if it doesn't, then you've got to look at the problem.
So would it work as well as the 2010 manifesto, which promised to reduce net migration to tens of thousands, or the 2015 manifesto? I mean, what I'm saying to you is...
We've now got Brexit and we can do it.
But there's been a failure of this time and time again. Let's get to the heart. I wish these things were being debated more. They're not. Let's get to the heart of it. This leadership contest is, which you didn't want, I know very much. You felt it was the wrong thing to do, but it's happening. It's about tax, isn't it? Why is Liz's vision for tax and spend better than Rishi Sunak's?
Well, I think for a start, she's a Conservative. She believes in cutting...
She's a Liberal Democrat activist.
Maybe in the part, I think Churchill changed parties, didn't he? But the issue was, Rishi put up taxes. We promised in our manifesto not to do it. She's going to scrap that, and she's going to stop the increase in corporation tax. This is the way Conservative... We cut taxes, expand the economy and deal with that. We don't put taxes up and then decide to give a bit back to them and all over the place. So she's the Conservative, and that's why I'm supporting her, because she's the Conservative. I mean, it's hard for the former...
But Rishi now wants to cut 4p off everyone's income tax. The most radical tax proposal from a Conservative since Nigel Lawson.
And hang on a minute, wasn't he Chancellor and we got the record level of taxation almost ever in this country?
But like Liz Truss, he's changed.
Where I think you can prove over the years Liz has changed, and I remember right back the days she was in Reform, and actually by then she was a true Conservative. I believe she is the Conservative. Look, if you believe in the status quo, if you want to carry on, you want the orthodox, you vote for Rishi. If you want change and risk, you go for Liz, and that's what I want. I want to try Conservative policies, and if we're right, and if I'm right, and she does it, we might win the next general election.
She's going to win this contest, is she?
Look.
The Times say it's all tightening. It's down to 5%.
Look, I would never say that any of the. We've got what 4 weeks to go before the final. No, I think it's you have to fight.
And a slight hiccup overnight on regional pay.
Well, I don't think most people worry about that when Richie's done 9 U-turn. What I liked about that on Liz, she did it straight away. I can remember the time in government when obviously the policy was wrong and needed change, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
She did it straight away. I thought that was quite interesting, courageous.
Peter Bone making the case really quite passionately for Liz Truss to win the contest, and we've done our very best thus far to make sure both sides of this get equal time. Now, language matters. Mainstream media matters. It matters hugely. And, you know, we all know on both sides of the pond, and indeed around the rest of the English-speaking world, there have been some pretty big changes. The problem, particularly of racism, which now appears to be, on some days, the biggest crisis the country faces. Yet most of us who've been around for a few years think, well, actually, it's probably diminished in society. Well, someone has been having a deep dive into all of this, and I think the results of it are disturbing, to say the least. Professor Matt Goodwin from Canterbury, Kent University. They say when professors are looking young, you must be getting old. Matt, you've been looking at British newspapers in particular.
Yeah.
Over the last decade. What have you found?
Well, let me tell you, Nigel, I started this project because of something I read in America where a young academic called David Rosado had looked at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and had said, well, why are they talking so much about racism, transphobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, and also these new social justice or woke terms like white privilege, cultural appropriation, gender pronouns, gender neutral. And what David showed is basically the media had sort of gone off a cliff, had become obsessed with this new sort of language of discrimination and racism and prejudice. And I looked at that report and thought, well, that's incredibly interesting. I wonder what's happened in Britain. So I called up David in New Zealand and said, why don't we rerun your study in Britain? And what we found, as I shared this morning and put it on Twitter and so on, is exactly the same as America.
Was it 16 million newspaper articles?
We analysed 16 million articles using computer technology between 2000 and 2010, and what we found essentially was that references to racism up 800%, references to transphobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, all through the roof, despite the fact that every reliable piece of evidence we have suggests Britain has become more tolerant, more welcoming, more accepting, you know, less racist. So what's going on here? And that's what I really wanted to try and figure out.
So what is going on here? Is it that the media is reflecting something that you haven't spotted and I haven't spotted, that we have become more deeply intolerant? Or is it that the media is now actually leading the agenda and attempting to change the way we look at the world? Which way around is it?
My view is there's more truth now in the latter, and I think what's happened is that the media class, the people who are working in media, have fundamentally changed from the 80s and the 90s. They've become much more elite, much more likely to go to university, to pass through Oxbridge, to pass through the Russell Group institutions, much more elite than their counterparts were in the 1980s.
But you're a university professor. You're virtually saying that people who've gone to university have come out with a warped view of the world.
What I'm saying is that the ideas that we can see in this report, this idea of seeing the world as being a terrible place where racism is surging and transphobia is everywhere, and we need to revise our history and watch our cultural appropriation, I'm saying those ideas circulate much more readily in the elite institutions, and that is primarily where journalists are now coming from. And I actually think now, today, we need to really think hard about how we diversify the voices in our media. I mean, when you were coming up in politics, I imagine local media, regional media, was still incredibly powerful, right?
Absolutely.
Now, completely gutted out. So what you tend to find is journalists will go straight from Oxbridge, Russell Group universities, straight into the newsroom. And as one senior journalist said to me recently in France, he said, you know, the problem, Matt, is junior journalists don't see themselves as journalists. They see themselves as activists. They see themselves as politically motivated activists who are trying to change the world. It's a very different media from what we had in the 80s and the 90s.
And the big picture, what is actually behind this, big picture-wise? I mean, is this an attempt from those who believe strongly in a Marxist ideology to fundamentally change society, to make us hate ourselves, hate our history, hate the way we do things for some new order? Or is that just a bit too conspiratorial?
I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just a combination of the fact that the media has become much more reliant upon graduates from elite universities who tend to think they're trying to make the world a better place, and who have often moved much further to the left on identity and culture. The reason I called this report The Great Awakening is because in the US, in Spain, in France, in Britain, we now have a lot of evidence showing the same thing, which is that the people who tend to dominate many of the big institutions, media, universities, politics, are way further to the left on these identity and cultural issues.
And your polling the other week showed actually this is not where the public is at all on any of these things, which presumably is a great opportunity for GB News.
Well, I think I view GB News much in the way that I view all media disruptors, challengers, as really filling the hole that's been created by this disconnect between the people that are working in the media newsrooms and the rest of the country. And my frustration, putting my cards on the table, is that Brexit was supposed to bring this country closer together. It was supposed to address this disconnect between the people in power and the people outside of power. And every single survey and poll and report that I'm working on seems to show the opposite.
I think you're right. Matt Goodwin, fascinating, vital, important. Thank you. And of course, GB News is the People's Channel. Not, as a friend of mine once called much of the media, fake news. Well, it turns out, actually, in many ways, a lot of them are fake news. Now, quite a big moment today. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker, of course, across in the USA. I'm not particularly a fan of Nancy Pelosi, although I do admire her and her husband's financial market trading. They have made an absolute killing on the stock market since she's been Speaker of the House. I'm sure all of that is entirely coincidental. But she's off today and she's landed and she's in Taiwan. Now, this, of course, is seen by the Chinese as a very provocative move. Interestingly, the White House didn't seem to publicly back this trip, and I know there are some British MPs like Tom Tugendhat who intend to visit Taiwan. America does have a pledge that it will defend Taiwan against aggression from China. But in response to this, the Chinese authorities have launched military exercises all around Taiwan, including some live naval firing and some pretty strong statements. So China reacting very strongly to Nancy Pelosi being in Taiwan. Do we think it's a brave thing for Pelosi to do? Do we think it's a foolhardy and stupid thing for Pelosi to do? I have to say, I'm not normally a fan of the Democrats, but I do think her going shows actually that if the Chinese want to act, America might just do something. Might just do something. More thoughts from you coming in about who's going to do more about that channel crisis, about that TikTok video. One viewer says, I would say enough is enough with all these boats, but clearly it isn't, as it's still going on. The money this country would be saving is scary. The more we hand out, many more will still come. Yeah, well, that's right. But, you know, I don't see from these candidates any determination or desire to fundamentally change, frankly, anything. Ryan says, no, because neither is willing to leave the ECHR. They barely mentioned immigration at all during this contest. No, that's right, Ryan, because they basically agree with each other. Another says, can but won't, status quo. And finally, another says, they can get us out of the Refugee Convention and the ECHR. They can sack Priti Patel, who is incompetent, and they can stop paying £4.7 million per day to keep asylum seekers in hotels and start the deportation flights. One thing for certain, this issue, it simply isn't going to go away. Now, those of a certain age will remember the power that Spitting Image had back in the 1980s, the vast audiences that it attracted. And one of the absolute favourites was Margaret Thatcher. Well, the voice of Margaret Thatcher, he's now an author today, Stephen Allen, joins me in a moment on Talking Pints.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's that time of the day. Yes, it is time indeed for Talking Pints. And Steve Allen, I said to you earlier, was the voice of Margaret Thatcher on Spitting Image, that very powerful programme in the 1980s. And here are some of his best bits.
There are many ways people can help themselves without becoming a burden on the state. For example...
Wake up, you blithering idiot! You've made another balls up in Europe!
And Jeffrey's made a balls.
You know, Spitting Image portrayed me as someone who is out of important. That we get people's minds off the unions, the GLC, the EEC, etc., etc.
Well, it was magnificent. It was really, really funny. And Steve Allen, you were that voice. And it kind of... I think a lot of us recognise that voice more than when she actually spoke.
Well, it's the same with all impressionists when you've got a character. Do you remember Dennis Seeley and Mike Yarwood?
Yeah.
You know, people didn't know what Dennis Seeley sounded like, and Mike Yarwood invented a version of Dennis Seeley.
Which was funny.
Which was very funny, which he was very good at. And that became the way people imagined, you know, Dennis Healy, what a silly Billy. Well, he never said that, but it became his catchphrase.
But it became as if he had. Now, you've got a cup of tea here, and a rather,
yes, I have.
rather magnificent teapot. So those on radio can't see, but it is Margaret Thatcher.
It is her. It is herself, yes.
As a teapot.
Goodness, can I just say, I think the nose is a little bit longer than in reality. And I'm sure I'm very good at pouring. Goodness me, I am.
It's wonderful stuff. And I want to talk a lot about Spitting Image and what you're doing today. But what you're doing today, I think, a lot of relevance from your upbringing. You know, and to say that your upbringing was tough is, I think, would be rather British understatement, really.
Well, here's the thing, though. My mother died when I was very young. My father was schizophrenic, and I ran away from home when I was 14. That's it. Because from then on, I was rescued by my grandmother.
Yes.
And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And she was a wonderful woman, very tough, very loving. So I was loved and looked after. So, yeah, it was a tough background, but at the same time, I was also very, very lucky.
It's really interesting because you had TB as well and suffered periods of isolation because of that. So you're not damaged by any of this?
I think the consumption, the TB, I think that made me isolated because I was very young. I didn't understand what was going on. I was only about 3 or 4, I think. And I think it made me emotionally self-sufficient, if that makes sense.
Is that a good thing?
Well, it means that you can spend your life writing, and you're very happy with your own company. You learn to be happy with your own company.
You talking about all this is interesting, because these days you'd be a victim.
I don't like the sense of, if you turn yourself into a victim, I think you're turning yourself into a problem. I think that the way to look at life, the way I've tried to look at life, is that bad things happen, but you know that good things can come out of it. And as I said, I was just very lucky.
You're absolutely right. Now, for you, it's always going to be drama. It's always going to be comedy, and you're up and you're there on the boards, and you get this big break at a very young age.
Yeah, it was just after university, and I'd always been interested in politics because I'd always sort of impersonate, partly because of Mike Yarwood, because Mike Yarwood did all the politicians as well. So I'd always been, and it was a political household as well, and so Radio 4 was on all the time, so I knew all the politicians. Yeah. So I met John Lloyd, and I did my Margaret Thatcher, and he said, "Who else do you do?" And I said, "I do Roy Hattersley," and Roy Hattersley was a wonderful character to do, because he claimed to be the eponymous hero of Spitting Image, because the only puppet who actually did any spitting. And so I was actually, it was just one of those things where it was exactly at the right time. I was the right person for the show, and they hadn't cast anybody either.
Right. Yeah.
You know, what actors sometimes think is that they've sorted out the casting. Well, often the producers are desperate for people. Now, everything to fit it, the stars were somehow...
And suddenly you're in, and the thing just takes off like a rocket, doesn't it?
It does. Well, it takes a year or so. The initial viewing figures were a bit low. But then what happened was the pictures of the characters started appearing in the newspapers instead of the characters. So on budget day...
That's what I say. I remember your voice more than that.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah. You remember... And I did... Another one I did on Spitting Image was Robert Ronsey. And the real Robert Ronsey spoke very slowly and precisely. And John Lloyd, our producer, said, "Steve, this is useless. You know, it's too slow. You've got to speed it up." He gave me the best note I've ever had from a director. He said, "Do it as a 7-year-old boy." So I took that voice and speeded it up and made it much younger. And everybody in the Church of England, we're not actually far from it.
No, we're not. Lambeth Palace.
They all impersonated my impersonation of Robert Ronsey.
No, you did, because, I mean, obviously you had a great gift for it, and the programme was amazing. But what fascinates me is this. So much political satire these days is left-wing. It's seen to be left-wing, and in fact, many of its exponents quite proudly say they are left-wing, and that leads to a lot of criticism. Yet Spitting Image, to my knowledge, in a decade when the Thatcher government attacked the BBC and these things come back again and again, at no point did Spitting Image ever get accused of political bias. How did it manage that?
Well, the simple answer to that is that we didn't really talk politics. None of the voice artists were massively interested in politics, either the puppeteers. The people who were interested in politics were Roger Law and Peter Flock, and they hated politicians. They didn't care which party they came from. They just hated politicians. John Lloyd, our producer, he hated the word satire. He said, "I don't think it's right, satire, because I think satire needs to have a moral viewpoint. It has to have a perspective." And in a way, you're right, because Spitting Image never showed its moral viewpoint. And John Lloyd used to say, it's not satire, it's basically to the rich and famous on a Sunday night before you have to get up on a Monday morning and go to work. And I think that's what it was. And also on Spitting Image, we had little characters like Alan Bennett, and Alan Bennett used to, with Little Thora Hurd, it used to leaven, as it were, the heavy political stuff. And there was a lightness and a silliness. I mean, that's what I always liked about Spitting Image, that it could be so silly.
Yeah.
And of course, it also came from a great tradition of Punch and Judy and King Lear and the All Licensed Fool. It was as if this particular slot on Sunday night, which also had the New Statesman, it was almost as if to say, ITV was saying, you've got this half hour, we can laugh at politicians. enjoy yourself.
We did
we
it
only
so
give you
well.
this half hour.
Yeah, and New Statesman too was terrific.
And the New Statesman,
which I loved. You know, now of course my political career came after Spitting Image, but I know that you'd have had great fun with me, and I wouldn't have minded one little bit because the cartoonists certainly had some fun. But think back 20, 30, 40 years. You mentioned Mike Yarwood earlier on, who was kind of the king of this, or sort of modern inventor of this. But you go back to Rory Bremner and all the other people that you work with. I mean, impressions were big on telly. Now we've got Dead Ringers on Radio 4, which I love. I think they're terrific. But what's happened to impressions?
Well, it's what do you do with the impression? Is it
the politicians are too boring now to bother with?
No, it's not. It's not at all. There's a very interesting politicians. It's what do you do with the impression? And I've stopped because you get to... Mike Yarwood told me this. He said, look, when you're 25 and you're impersonating somebody who's 50, that's funny. When you're 50 and impersonating somebody 25, that's not so funny. So impressionists get to an age when they essentially have to stop doing it. So I still do a few, but I don't do that many. But Spitting Image was pretty much the sort of zenith of it, really, precisely because we were doing interesting things with the characters.
No, I mean, you really were. Now, you've done a fantastic job, but you've changed careers.
I have.
There is a change of tack. Clearly, age has made you decide not to be an impressionist after following Mike Yarwood's advice. And you've now become an author. And here it is, folks. It is The Time That Never Was by Steve Nallen, you see. And interestingly, it's about a young lad in the north of England who goes to live with his granny and sleeps in the attic. And of course, so many great books over the years are based on something to do with life experience.
I think if you put a bit of your own truth in a book, people will recognise it as a truth. Not the truth, because there are many truths. Everybody has their own truth. And my unique perspective on life, growing up in the 1970s with David Bowie and all the rest of it, I was being brought up by a woman who was born before the Titanic sank. And that gave me a perspective on life. And she lived through 2 world wars. I say she was the toughest woman I ever met. My teacher was terrified of her. And I said, well, at what level were you terrified? He said, Steve, meeting Mrs. Oddie was the name of my grandmother.
Yeah.
He said, meeting your grandmother was at bowel movement level.
Sort of Grandma Giles type.
Well, it's Grandma Giles, absolutely Grandma Giles, who was Giles, of course. I mean, that's the thing about Giles.
Yeah.
That's where the comedy of the book comes from. So I've changed careers, but I've still trying to put as much comedy into it. And one of the problems at the moment, I think, on television, we chatted about this earlier, is there's not that much comedy on television that you can
but any
enjoy.
form of comedy might cause offence.
Well, don't be so offended is my attitude. Don't be so offended. There are still places that in London where you can perform and you can basically say anything you like, but it's less the case on television for partly the reasons that your previous guest was talking about. It's a university educated group, and that began, I think, with the Monty Python. Previous to that, you had people like Dennis Main Wilson, Johnny Hamp. I tell you one thing that Dennis Main Wilson said to me. He said he was working at the BBC, and a scene shifter came up to him and gave him a script. He said, "Do you read this? It's a comedy script." He went home and read it. It was by a man called John Sullivan, Citizen Smith, and he got it produced the next day. That wouldn't happen. That just wouldn't happen.
And they
today.
take risks and they go with it.
But he just But you see, Dennis Main Wilson recognised he was. I mean, he produced the Goons.
Yeah.
He was involved in Steptoe. He worked with everyone. He knew what comedy was. He understood it.
We need more comedy, more fun, more impressions, more to the world.
Absolutely more fun, more silliness, more fun and silliness.
More cartoons. And lots of people being absolutely offended by virtually everything. And we tell them, go to hell, don't worry about it. And I have to say, Steve, what a pleasure to have you on Talking Pints, and great luck.
Thank you.
With your new career. Great to have you. Thank you. OK, I've got a couple of minutes left with you. It is time for Barrage the Farage. I've no idea what you've sent in, so here goes. Mike asks, Liz Truss says she's going to ignore Nicola Sturgeon, but is that the right thing to do? Well, she kind of calls Nicola a show-off, says she's going to ignore her. And here's the fun thing about Liz Truss. If she wins, when she wins, looking at the numbers, it will be a very, very high-risk environment. Peter Bone used the word risk about her just earlier. She is more prone to coming out with all sorts of statements even than Boris Johnson was as Prime Minister. She does seem to fire from the hip, and I think she's likely to get herself into real trouble very, very easily. Ryan asks me, if the Tories can't crack down on illegal migration, who will? Well, truth is, folks, that there's zero chance of Labour doing it. Now, they say what they're going to do is target the criminal gangs. And I have paid, absolutely full respect to the authorities for the gang they did nick. 39 of them. The big guy is up in court in London. The gang made 13 million out of trafficking. They got 10,000 people across the English Channel. And cracking down on that gang slowed the numbers that were coming across in July. But as you can see, the Albanians have now taken over. They've got boats. They're packing them in 50 at a time. They're allowed by TikTok and other social media channels to advertise, it seems, willy-nilly. So the truth of it is, no one is going to crack down. And actually, rather like membership of the European Union was for most of my career, pretty much the entirety of the UK political and media class think it's a jolly good thing to be part of the ECHR and all the various United Nations things we're signed up to, because it shows what wonderful, lovely, civilised people we are. Oh, absolutely. Let's put everybody in the world ahead of our own interests and our own people, which is pretty much what it boils down to. Thank you very much indeed for joining me here this evening. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. I don't think we've learned anything when it comes to migration and energy that suggests to me that either Truss or Sunak will be better. But there we are. Anyway, I'll hand over to Mark Stein.
There is no political downside to any candidate who says we're pulling out of the European Court of Human Rights. This country has a great legal tradition that it's spread around the world, common law. It's in dozens of countries. We don't need these genius Albanian jurists pronouncing on what's going on.
I agree. But where's the courage?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. It shouldn't take that. This shouldn't take that much courage, Nigel, because there is no downside to it. And someone needs to actually just say that and get it. Great show, as always. We will try to match it and keep things going. Talking a lot of, there's been signs, actually, of Liz Truss butching up on a couple of these things, so we'll see whether that has any real-world meaning. And we got all the other fun stuff as well, including Taiwan and China and all that coming up for you right after the weather.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Staying largely cloudy over the next 24 hours, breezy as well, but that breeze coming from the southwest will continue to bring some warmth and humidity with it. Low pressure to the north and northwest of the UK at the moment. That's brought some rain and a lot of cloud in from the Atlantic during the last 24 hours. And over the next 24 hours, we'll continue to see largely cloudy skies and some rain, mostly northern and western England overnight, as well as parts of Wales, especially over the hills and coasts. Showers or even longer spells of rain pushing into the northwest of Scotland, Northern Ireland, spreading into other parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. A lot of cloud overnight and a continued breeze, so a mild, if rather muggy night to come, 15 to 18 Celsius fairly widely. Then a gloomy start to the day, especially for parts of Wales and the southwest. Early rain here clears into central England, turns to showers, and then skies brightening. It stays dry through the day in the far southeast. Sunshine reappears for the southern half of the UK, but scattered showers continue for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. A cooler feel in the north, but still very warm in the southeast, 27 to 28 Celsius. Then we keep the clear skies in the south overnight, but further showers will affect North Wales, Northern England, parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, perhaps even some more prolonged rain at times for the west of Scotland, that moving eastwards through the early hours of Thursday. And it's another mild night, but not quite as warm. Temperatures in Scotland and Northern Ireland at around 12 Celsius, England and Wales more like 14 to 16 degrees. And plenty of sunshine for much of England and Wales first thing Thursday. A scattering of showers for northern England, parts of north and west Wales. More especially Scotland and Northern Ireland will see some showers at times, interspersed by brighter spells. And a similar picture on Friday, showers in the north, brighter in the south, turning cooler across the board.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hey, welcome along. Remember this Van Morrison classic? Well, no, you won't, because it got instantly vaporized by iTunes and Spotify, but Sir Van did actually